Maya Jenkins pushed her cleaning cart down the polished hallway of the 15th floor, just like she had done every evening for the past 3 years. The wheels squeaked softly against the marble floor, a sound she had grown so used to that she barely noticed it anymore. Outside the tall windows, the city lights were starting to flicker on as the sun dipped below the horizon. Most of the office workers had already gone home, leaving behind empty desks and the faint smell of coffee that had been sitting too long in the break room. She liked this time of day, the quiet, the solitude. It gave her time to think, to plan, to just be herself, without anyone watching or judging. Maya hummed softly as she worked, an old gospel song her mother used to sing when Maya was a child. At 32 years old, she had learned that honest work was nothing to be ashamed of. Her mother had taught her that. "Baby," her mama would say, "it doesn't matter what you do. What matters is that you do it with your whole heart." And Maya did. She took pride in making sure every surface gleamed, every trash can was emptied, every floor shined. The other janitors sometimes teased her for being too thorough, but she didn't mind. This job paid her bills. It helped her take care of her mother, who was getting older and needed more help these days. It put food on the table and kept a roof over their heads. That was enough. Maya pulled out her spray bottle and began wiping down the glass doors that led to the executive offices. Through the transparent surface, she could see the fancy furniture and expensive artwork that decorated these spaces. She had been in these offices countless times, but she never lingered. She did her job and moved on. That was the unspoken rule. The cleaning staff was supposed to be invisible, like ghosts who made everything perfect while nobody was looking. She was just finishing the last door when she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that carried a certain weight to them. Maya glanced over her shoulder and saw Richard Hartman striding down the hallway. He was the new vice president of operations, hired just 2 months ago from some big company up north. Maya had seen him around but had never spoken to him directly. She didn't need to. Men like him didn't speak to women like her. Richard stopped at his office door, just a few feet away from where Maya was working. She could feel his eyes on her, studying her in a way that made her skin prickle with discomfort. She kept her head down and continued wiping the glass, hoping he would just go into his office and leave her alone. But he didn't move. He just stood there, watching. Maya tried to ignore him, but the silence grew heavy. Finally, she stepped back to grab her cart, ready to move to the next section. That's when her elbow accidentally caught the small decorative plant sitting on the credenza near the elevator. The ceramic pot tipped over, and soil spilled onto the pristine floor. "Oh no," Maya whispered, immediately dropping to her knees to clean up the mess. Her heart raced. It was such a small accident, the kind of thing that happened to everyone, but she felt a wave of panic wash over her. She hated making mistakes, especially where people could see. Useless. The word cut through the silence like a knife. Maya froze, her hand still gathering the spilled soil. "Absolutely useless," Richard repeated, louder this time. His voice dripped with contempt. "This is exactly what I've been talking about. This is exactly what's wrong with these affirmative action hires." Maya's breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she looked up at him. Richard stood there with his arms crossed, his face twisted in disgust. He wasn't even trying to hide it. Other employees who were working late had started to peek out of their offices, drawn by the commotion. "People like you," Richard continued, his voice growing louder and more confident with each word, "don't belong in buildings like this. The only reason you're here is because somebody felt sorry for you or needed to fill some quota. You're not qualified to do anything except clean up after your betters." The words hung in the air like poison. Maya felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of him. She had faced discrimination before. Growing up in the South, being a black woman in America, she had heard slurs and insults more times than she could count, but it never got easier. Each time still felt like a punch to the gut. She wanted to say something, wanted to stand up and tell him that she was somebody, that she mattered, that she had dignity and worth beyond whatever he saw when he looked at her. But the words stuck in her throat. This man had power. He could have her fired with a single phone call. and she couldn't afford to lose this job. Her mother depended on her. The medications, the doctor visits, the bills that never stopped coming, so Maya did what she had learned to do over the years. She swallowed her pride, kept her head down, and focused on cleaning up the spilled soil. Her hands trembled slightly as she scooped the dirt back into the pot, but she kept working. One scoop at a time. Just get through this moment. Just survive. Richard let out a sharp laugh. It was a cruel sound filled with satisfaction. He had humiliated her, and he knew it. He had put her in her place, reminded her of where she stood in the pecking order. And he had done it in front of witnesses, marking his territory like some kind of alpha predator. Pathetic, he muttered, shaking his head. Then he turned on his heel and walked into his office, slamming the door behind him. The hallway remained silent for a long moment. Maya could feel the eyes of the other employees still on her, some sympathetic, others simply uncomfortable. Nobody said anything. Nobody came to her defense. They all just slowly retreated back into their offices, leaving her alone with her shame and her cleaning cart. Maya finished cleaning up the soil with mechanical precision. She placed the plant back on the credenza, wiped down the floor until it gleamed, and gathered her supplies. Her face felt hot and her chest was tight, but she refused to break down. Not here. Not where people could see. She pushed her cart to the service elevator and rode it down to the basement where the janitorial supplies were kept. Only when she was alone in the dim storage room did she allow herself to lean against the wall and take a shaky breath. The tears came then, hot and angry, streaming down her face. She thought about her mother, sleeping peacefully at home, unaware of what had just happened. She thought about her husband, David, who was away on another one of his business trips. He called her every night when he was traveling, and she knew he would call tonight. What would she tell him? Should she even mention it? Maya wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. She had work to finish, floors to clean, bathrooms to scrub. Life didn't stop just because someone had tried to break her spirit. She had survived worse. She would survive this too. But as she picked up her cleaning supplies and headed back to the elevator, Maya didn't know that the man who had just humiliated her had made the biggest mistake of his life. She didn't know that the wheels of justice were already beginning to turn, and she definitely didn't know that by tomorrow, Richard Hartman's world would come crashing down around him in ways he could never have imagined. The weekend passed slowly for Maya. Saturday morning, she woke up early like always, made breakfast for her mother, and tried to act like everything was normal. But her mother knew her too well. Over scrambled eggs and toast, the older woman reached across the table and placed a weathered hand over Maya's. "What's troubling you, baby?" her mother asked, her voice soft but knowing. Maya tried to smile. "Nothing, Mama. Just tired from work." Her mother's eyes searched her face. "Maya Louise Jenkins, I raised you. I know when something's eating at you." Maya looked down at her plate. She hadn't planned on telling her mother what happened. The woman had enough to worry about with her diabetes and high blood pressure. But the weight of Friday night pressed down on her chest, and before she knew it, the whole story came tumbling out. The plant, the insults, the laughter, the way everyone had just stood there and watched. Her mother listened without interrupting, her grip on Maya's hand growing tighter. When Maya finished, there were tears in the older woman's eyes. "That man had no right," her mother said, her voice shaking with anger. "No right at all. You need to report him, baby. You need to tell someone." Maya shook her head. "Mama, you know how these things work. He's a vice president. I'm just a janitor. Who do you think they're going to believe? Who do you think they're going to protect?" "But it's not right." "I know it's not right," Maya said, her voice cracking. "But right doesn't always win. You taught me that too." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she squeezed Maya's hand one more time. "When does David get back?" "Tuesday night." "Good. You tell him what happened. That man loves you more than life itself. He'll know what to do." Maya nodded, but inside she wasn't so sure. David was wonderful, supportive, and kind. But what could he really do? He couldn't fight her battles at work. He couldn't protect her from every cruel person in the world. Some things you just had to endure. By Monday morning, Maya had convinced herself to just move forward. She would avoid Richard Hartman as much as possible. She would do her job, keep her head down, and not cause any trouble. That was the safest path. But when she arrived at work Monday evening, she realized that Friday's incident had spread through the janitorial staff like wildfire. In the break room, before their shifts started, her co-workers gathered around her. "Maya, we heard what that man said to you," said Gloria, one of the older women who had worked at Thornfield Industries for over 15 years. "That's not okay. That's discrimination. That's harassment." "We think you should go to HR," added Thomas, a quiet man who usually kept to himself. "We'll back you up. We'll be your witnesses." Maya felt overwhelmed by their support, but also terrified. "I appreciate it, I really do. But you know how this works. If I make waves, I'll be the one who ends up losing my job. They'll find some reason to let me go. And I can't afford that right now." "But what he did was wrong," Gloria insisted. "You can't just let him get away with it." "I'm not trying to let him get away with anything," Maya said quietly. "I'm just trying to survive." The conversation weighed on her throughout her shift. As she cleaned offices and emptied trash cans, she kept replaying Friday night in her mind. The humiliation, the helplessness, the anger that she had swallowed down because she had no other choice. When she got home that night, exhausted and emotionally drained, she found a message waiting on her phone. It was from David. He had called while she was at work, and his voicemail was brief. "Hey, sweetheart. Hope you had a good day. I'm wrapping things up here. Should be done by tomorrow. Call me when you can. Love you." Maya sat on the edge of her bed staring at her phone. She had been married to David for 5 years, and in all that time she had tried not to burden him with every little problem. He traveled so much for work, dealt with so much stress. The last thing he needed was to come home to her complaints. But this wasn't a little problem. This was something that had shaken her to her core. She dialed his number. He answered on the second ring. "There's my beautiful wife," David said, his voice warm and familiar. Just hearing it made Maya's eyes well up with tears. "Hey," she managed to say. There was a pause. Then David's voice changed, becoming more serious. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, I'm just tired." "Maya." The way he said her name told her that he wasn't buying it. "Talk to me. What happened?" And so, sitting alone in their bedroom, Maya told him everything. She told him about Richard Hartman's cruel words. She told him about the humiliation and the fear. She told him about her co-workers wanting her to go to HR and her own terror of losing her job. As she spoke, she could hear David's breathing change. She knew he was angry, could picture him clenching his jaw the way he always did when something upset him. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "David, I'm here," he said, and his voice was tight with controlled emotion. "Baby, I am so sorry you had to go through that. No one should ever speak to you that way. No one." "It's okay," Maya said automatically, even though it wasn't okay at all. "No, it's not okay," David said firmly. "It's not even close to okay. Listen to me. You are brilliant. You are hardworking. You are kind and strong and valuable. What that man said to you says everything about him and nothing about you." "Do you hear me?" Maya felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I hear you. I'm coming home," David said. "I'm going to wrap things up here tonight and catch the first flight out tomorrow morning. You don't have to do that. You said you had important meetings." "Nothing is more important than you," David said, and the conviction in his voice left no room for argument. "I'll be home soon. We'll figure this out together." After they hung up, Maya felt lighter somehow. She knew David couldn't magically fix everything. But just knowing that he cared, that he believed her, that he was coming home early just to be with her, that meant everything. She got ready for bed, checked on her mother one more time, and lay down in the darkness. Tomorrow she would have to go back to work. Tomorrow she would have to face those hallways again, possibly see Richard Hartman again. But at least she wouldn't be facing it alone. What Maya didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that David had immediately opened his laptop after their call. She didn't know that he had spent the next 3 hours reading through company reports, reviewing personnel files, and making very specific notes. She didn't know that he had sent several carefully worded emails to people in positions of power, and she definitely didn't know that Richard Hartman had just made an enemy of the most powerful person in the entire company, the man who could end his career with a single word. The man who was about to teach him a lesson he would never forget. Tuesday morning was going to be very interesting indeed. Richard Hartman woke up Tuesday morning feeling like he owned the world. He had slept well, enjoyed a protein smoothie and an expensive espresso, and was now driving his luxury sedan toward Thornfield Industries headquarters with his favorite playlist pumping through the speakers. Life was good. Better than good, actually. In the 2 months since he had joined the company, he had been making his mark. His cost-cutting proposals were getting attention. His efficiency reports were turning heads. And best of all, he had the ear of several board members who appreciated his no-nonsense approach to business. Richard smiled to himself. By this time next year, he would probably be an executive vice president, maybe even chief operating officer. The incident with that janitor on Friday was already a distant memory. He had barely thought about it over the weekend. As far as Richard was concerned, he had simply stated facts. Some people were meant to lead and others were meant to follow. That was just the natural order of things. He pulled into his reserved parking spot and grabbed his briefcase. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and he had a presentation to give. This was his chance to really shine, to show the board that bringing him on board was one of the smartest decisions they had ever made. Richard rode the elevator up to the 15th floor, nodded at a few colleagues, and settled into his office to review his notes one more time. His presentation was solid. Charts, graphs, projected savings, efficiency metrics. It was all there, polished and professional. At 9:45, his assistant knocked on his door. "Mr. Hartman, the board meeting is about to start." "Excellent," Richard said, grabbing his laptop and presentation materials. He followed the flow of executives and board members down the hallway toward the large conference room at the end of the floor. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, a massive oak table that could seat 30 people, and artwork that probably cost more than most people's houses. Richard took his usual seat about halfway down the table, close enough to the action to be noticed but not so presumptuous as to sit near the head of the table. That spot was reserved for the CEO, David Morrison. Richard had never actually met the man in person. Morrison had been traveling when Richard was hired, and their paths simply hadn't crossed yet. But Richard had heard things about him. Morrison was apparently one of those touchy-feely CEOs who spent more time visiting factory floors and talking to warehouse workers than actually running the company. Richard didn't understand that approach. Leadership meant making tough decisions, not holding hands with employees who should just be grateful to have jobs. The room gradually filled with people, board members in expensive suits, senior executives with their laptops and leather portfolios, everyone settling into their seats making small talk, pouring coffee from the carafes that had been set out. Then the door opened and the room fell silent. A man walked in, tall and composed, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. He moved with a quiet confidence that immediately commanded attention. Richard glanced up from his notes and felt something strange flutter in his chest. Something like recognition, though he couldn't quite place why. "Good morning, everyone," the man said, his voice warm but carrying an unmistakable note of authority. He walked to the head of the table and set down his briefcase. "Thank you all for being here. David Morrison." The CEO. Richard studied him more carefully now. There was something familiar about his face, but Richard was certain they had never met. Maybe he had seen his photo in some company newsletter. The meeting began with the usual formalities. Financial reports, market analyses, updates on various projects. Richard half listened, mentally rehearsing his own presentation. He was scheduled to speak during the operations update section, which would be coming up soon. David Morrison led the meeting with an easy competence that Richard had to grudgingly respect. The man knew his numbers, asked intelligent questions, and kept things moving at a good pace. Maybe he wasn't as soft as Richard had heard. Finally, it was time for the operations update. Richard stood, connected his laptop to the display screen, and launched into his presentation. He spoke about streamlining processes, reducing redundancies, cutting unnecessary expenses. His voice was confident, his slides were crisp, and he could see several board members nodding along. "As you can see," Richard concluded, "implementing these measures could save the company approximately $3.2 million annually. That's money we can reinvest in growth initiatives or return to shareholders." There was a polite smattering of applause. Richard returned to his seat, satisfied with his performance. He had nailed it. The meeting continued through several more agenda items: budget approvals, expansion plans, partnership opportunities. Richard was starting to zone out a bit when David Morrison's voice cut through his thoughts. "Before we adjourn," the CEO said, leaning forward in his chair, "I need to address a serious matter that has come to my attention." The room seemed to shift. People sat up straighter. The casual atmosphere that had developed over the past 90 minutes suddenly evaporated. Richard felt a small prickle of unease, though he couldn't say why. "Last Friday evening," David continued, his voice measured but cold, "a valued member of our Thornfield family was subjected to verbal abuse by someone in this room. A hard-working woman who has served this company faithfully for 3 years was humiliated, insulted, and subjected to racist remarks." Richard's stomach dropped. No, this couldn't be about that. How would the CEO even know about some minor incident with a janitor? The employee in question, David said, his eyes now scanning the room, was told she was useless. She was told that people like her don't belong in buildings like this except to clean up after their betters. She was subjected to comments about affirmative action and had her dignity stripped away while others watched. The room was silent now, deathly silent. Richard could feel sweat starting to form on his forehead. Several people were looking around, trying to figure out who David was talking about. "The woman who was subjected to this abuse," David continued, his voice taking on an edge like steel, "is Maya Jenkins. She works on our evening janitorial staff. She's a dedicated employee, a kind person, and someone who shows up every single day and does her job with pride." Richard felt like he couldn't breathe. This was really happening. The CEO was really bringing this up in a board meeting. "She's also," David said, his eyes now locking directly onto Richard, "my wife." The room erupted in shocked gasps and murmurs. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. His wife? The janitor was married to the CEO? It was impossible. It didn't make sense. CEOs didn't marry janitors. People from David Morrison's world didn't marry people from that woman's world. There had to be some mistake. But David Morrison's face showed no sign of joking. If anything, his expression had grown even harder. "You see, Mr. Hartman," David continued, and hearing his name spoken aloud made Richard flinch. "My wife insisted on keeping her maiden name when we got married. She wanted to work her way up in this company on her own merits, without anyone knowing about our relationship. She didn't want special treatment. She just wanted to be respected for who she is and what she contributes." David stood up now, placing his hands flat on the table. "And she has earned that respect from everyone who matters. From her colleagues, from the employees who know her, from people who understand that a person's worth isn't determined by their job title or the color of their skin." Richard tried to speak, tried to form words, but his mouth had gone completely dry. "Maya came home Friday night," David said, his voice quieter now but somehow more devastating. "And she tried to hide what happened from me, because that's the kind of person she is. She didn't want to cause trouble. She didn't want to make waves. But I could hear it in her voice that something was wrong, and eventually she told me everything." The CEO's eyes never left Richard's face, so now we're going to address it. The silence in the conference room felt like it could suffocate someone. Richard sat frozen in his chair, his mind racing in 1,000 different directions at once. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of nightmare. Any second now he would wake up in his bed and realize this was all just a bad dream, brought on by too much wine the night before. But the faces staring at him were very real. The disgust in their eyes was very real. And the man standing at the head of the table, looking at him like he was something scraped off the bottom of a shoe, was very real. "Mr. Hartman," David said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" Richard's mouth opened and closed. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to somehow make this better. But what could he possibly say? What words could undo what he had done? I didn't know," Richard finally stammered. "I didn't know she was your wife." David's expression didn't change. "And if she wasn't my wife? If she was just a janitor with no connection to anyone in power? Would that have made it acceptable?" "No, I just meant, what did you mean exactly? David interrupted. Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're saying it's only wrong to disrespect someone if they're connected to somebody important. That the only reason you shouldn't have called my wife useless is because she happens to be married to me. Richard felt sweat trickling down his back. That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? The room waited. Every eye was on Richard now. Board members who had been friendly with him just an hour ago now looked at him with cold distance. Colleagues he had shared lunch with wouldn't meet his gaze. I'm saying I made a mistake, Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. I shouldn't have spoken to her that way. I'm sorry. David studied him for a long moment. You're sorry. Interesting. Tell me, Mr. Hartman, are you sorry for what you did, or are you sorry that you got caught? Are you sorry that you hurt someone, or are you sorry that the person you hurt turned out to be someone who could actually affect your career? Richard didn't answer. He couldn't. Because deep down he knew the truth, and David knew it too. Let me tell you something about my wife, David said, his voice softening slightly. Maya could have told me who she was married to on her first day of work here. She could have used our relationship to get a better position, better hours, better treatment, but she didn't. Do you know why? Richard shook his head. Because she has integrity. Because she believes that respect should be earned through hard work and character, not through connections or titles. She wanted to prove herself on her own terms, and she has. For 3 years she's shown up every single night, done her job excellently, and asked for nothing in return except basic human decency. David's jaw tightened. And you couldn't even give her that. One of the board members, an older woman named Patricia who had been with the company for 20 years, cleared her throat. David, I think I speak for the entire board when I say that we're appalled by what happened. This kind of behavior has no place at Thornfield Industries. Thank you, Patricia, David said, nodding. I appreciate that. He turned his attention back to Richard. Mr. Hartman, your employment with Thornfield Industries is terminated, effective immediately. You'll receive your final paycheck and the severance outlined in your contract, but that's where our professional relationship ends. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. Fired. He was being fired. In front of the entire board. In front of everyone who mattered in this company. You can't do this, Richard said, his voice rising with desperation. I have a contract. I have protections. You can't just fire me because... Because why? David interrupted. Because you created a hostile work environment. Because you engaged in racial discrimination. Because you violated every principle this company stands for. Actually, Mr. Hartman, I can absolutely fire you for those reasons. And I am. Richard looked around the table, searching for an ally, for someone who might stand up for him, but there was nothing. Just cold stares and shaking heads. I'll fight this, Richard said, standing up now, his hands trembling. I'll sue. I'll take this to court. You'll do what you need to do, David said calmly. But let me be very clear about something. Every word you said to my wife was overheard by multiple employees. We have witnesses, we have documentation. If you want to take this to court, we'll be happy to see you there. But I promise you, you won't like how it turns out. David nodded toward the door where 2 security guards had quietly entered. These gentlemen will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. Your company laptop, phone, and access cards will need to be surrendered before you leave the building. Richard stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to fully process what was happening. Just this morning he had been on top of the world. He had been planning his rise through the company ranks. And now, in the span of 10 minutes, it was all gone. Mr. Hartman, one of the security guards said gently, please come with us. Richard looked at David one more time. I'm sorry, he said again, and this time there were tears in his eyes. I'm truly sorry. Please, can't we talk about this? Can't we find some other solution? David's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. The person you need to apologize to isn't in this room. And frankly, after what you put her through, she deserves far better than anything you could offer right now. The security guard stepped forward, and Richard had no choice but to follow them. As he walked toward the door, he could hear the whispers starting behind him. By tonight, everyone in the company would know what happened. By tomorrow, word would spread through the industry. His reputation, his career, everything he had worked for, it was all crumbling like sand. The walk to his office felt like a funeral march. Employees peeked out of their cubicles watching him pass with the security guards. The whispers followed him like shadows. When he reached his office, he mechanically packed his few personal items into a cardboard box. His college degree hanging on the wall, a photo of his parents, a few books. It took less than 15 minutes to erase all evidence that he had ever worked there. As the security guards escorted him out of the building, Richard passed by a janitor's cart in the hallway. For a moment he paused, staring at it. Just a cart with cleaning supplies. Simple, humble. The kind of thing he had looked down on his entire life. But the person who pushed that cart had more integrity in her little finger than Richard had in his entire body. She had dignity. She had character. She had something that all of Richard's education and ambition and confidence couldn't buy. The security guards led him to his car in the parking garage. They watched as he loaded his box into the trunk, as he climbed into the driver's seat, as he started the engine. Richard sat there for a moment, his hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. His phone buzzed. Probably his assistant or maybe a colleague texting to ask what happened. He didn't look at it. Instead, he thought about Maya, about the look on her face when he had called her useless, about the way she had quietly cleaned up that spilled dirt while he had stood there mocking her. He thought about all the times in his life he had judged people based on their jobs, their backgrounds, their skin color, all the times he had believed that success and money and power made him better than someone else. And for the first time in his life, Richard Hartman understood what it felt like to lose everything because of his own cruelty. He put the car in reverse and drove away from Thornfield Industries for the last time. After the security guards escorted Richard out, David remained standing at the head of the conference table. The board members and executives sat in silence, processing everything that had just happened. Finally, David took a deep breath and addressed the room. "I want to make something very clear," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "What happened to my wife could have happened to anyone in this company. The fact that she's married to me is irrelevant to the core issue here. Every single person who works at Thornfield Industries, from the executive suite to the mailroom to the janitorial staff, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." Patricia nodded firmly. "We're with you, David, 100%. Other board members murmured their agreement. David looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. This company was built on certain values: respect, integrity, the belief that everyone has something valuable to contribute. Anyone who can't uphold those values has no place here, regardless of their position or how much money they might save us." He gathered his papers and closed his laptop. "I'm going to end this meeting early. I need to go home to my wife. But I want each of you to think about what happened here today. Think about the culture we're creating in this company. And if you see something like this happening again, to anyone, I expect you to speak up." David left the conference room and headed straight for the parking garage. His hands were shaking slightly as he unlocked his car. The anger he had been holding back during the meeting was starting to surface now. Not just anger at Richard Hartman, but anger at a system that made people like Maya feel like they couldn't speak up. Anger at a world where someone could be treated that way in the first place. He drove home faster than usual, his mind racing. When he pulled into the driveway of their modest two-story house, he saw Maya's car already there. She must have taken the day off. David's heart clenched. She never took days off unless something was seriously wrong. He found her in the kitchen making tea. She turned when she heard him come in, and the surprise on her face was evident. "David, what are you doing home? I thought you had meetings all day." He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight. Maya stood still for a moment, confused, then slowly relaxed into his embrace. "What's going on?" she asked softly. David pulled back just enough to look at her face. "Richard Hartman doesn't work at Thornfield Industries anymore." Maya's eyes widened. "What, David, what did you do?" "What I should have done the moment you told me what happened," he said. "I fired him. In front of the entire board." Maya's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh no, David, I didn't want you to do that. I didn't want to cause problems. This is going to make everything worse for me at work. Maya, listen to me." David took her hands in his. "You didn't cause any problems. He did. What he said to you was wrong. It was discrimination. It was harassment. And I won't allow anyone to treat you or anyone else in this company that way. Tears started sliding down Maya's cheeks. But now everyone's going to know. They're going to know that I'm your wife. They're going to think I got special treatment. You didn't get special treatment, David said firmly. I would have fired him if he had said those things to any employee. The only difference is that this time it was personal for me too. Maya sank into a chair at the kitchen table, and David sat down next to her. She was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. I don't know if I can go back there, she finally said. How am I supposed to face everyone now? They'll all be talking about me, looking at me differently. David squeezed her hand. I know this is hard. I know it's not what you wanted. But Maya, you've been hiding who you are for 3 years, working twice as hard as everyone else to prove yourself. Don't you think it's time to step out of the shadows? I like the shadows, Maya said with a small, sad laugh. They were safe. But they weren't fair to you, David replied. You're brilliant. You're talented. You have so much to offer beyond cleaning floors, and I think you know that. Maya looked at him, her eyes searching his face. What are you saying? I'm saying that I want you to consider joining our management training program. We have a 6-month program that prepares people for leadership roles. You'd be perfect for it. David, I can't. People will say I only got in because I'm your wife. Let them say it, David said. You and I will know the truth. You've been studying business administration at night for the past 2 years. You've been reading every management book you can get your hands on. You know this company inside and out because you've seen every part of it. You're more qualified than half the people we hire straight out of college. Maya wiped her eyes. I'm scared, I know. But you're also brave. You've been brave every single day. Facing people who underestimated you, who looked right through you. It's time to let them really see you. That evening, Maya's mother came over for dinner. When she heard what had happened, she pulled Maya into a tight hug. Baby, I'm proud of you, her mother said. Not because your husband fired that man, but because you told the truth about what happened. You didn't stay silent. That takes courage. I feel like I ruined someone's life, Maya admitted. Her mother shook her head. No, baby. He ruined his own life the moment he decided to treat another human being with cruelty. You just held up a mirror to his actions. Over the next few days, Maya struggled with her decision. David didn't push her, but he left information about the management training program on the kitchen counter. Maya found herself reading through it late at night, imagining what it might be like to walk through Thornfield Industries as something other than invisible. Finally, 1 week after the incident, Maya made her decision. She called David at work. I want to do it, she said. The training program. But I have one condition. Name it, David replied. I want to earn my place. Real evaluations. Real feedback. No special treatment just because I'm your wife. If I'm not cut out for it, I want to know. Deal, David said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. But Maya, I already know you're going to be amazing. 6 months later, Maya stood in a conference room on the 15th floor of Thornfield Industries, leading her first major presentation. She wore a professional suit, her hair pulled back neatly, her voice strong and clear as she outlined a new initiative to improve employee satisfaction across all departments. The board members listened attentively, asking questions, nodding along. When she finished, Patricia started the applause and others joined in. After the meeting, as Maya packed up her materials, Gloria from the janitorial staff stopped by. She had come up to deliver some paperwork to an executive. Maya, Gloria said, her eyes shining with pride. Look at you. I always knew you had it in you. Maya smiled. Thank you, Gloria, and thank you for having my back that day. Always, Gloria said. We look out for each other. That evening, David came home to find Maya in the kitchen cooking dinner. He wrapped his arms around her from behind. How did the presentation go? It went well, Maya said, turning to face him. Really well. Patricia said she was impressed. I told you, David said, kissing her forehead. Maya was quiet for a moment. You know what's strange? I spent 3 years trying to be invisible, and now that people can see me, really see me, it's not as scary as I thought it would be. That's because they're finally seeing the real you, David said. The woman I fell in love with. The woman who's always been extraordinary, whether anyone noticed or not. As for Richard Hartman, he spent the months after his termination doing a lot of soul-searching. He went to therapy. He volunteered at a community center. He started reading books about privilege and racism that he had always dismissed before. It was painful work, confronting the ugliness in himself that he had spent so long denying. He never got another high-level executive position. Word had spread through the industry about why he was fired, and no one wanted to take a chance on him. Eventually, he found work as a consultant for a small firm, making a fraction of what he used to earn. But he also found something he had never had before: humility, understanding, a genuine desire to be better than he had been. 1 year after the incident, Richard wrote a letter to Maya. He didn't mail it right away. He carried it in his pocket for weeks, reading it over and over, wondering if he had the right to send it. Finally, he dropped it in the mailbox. In the letter, he didn't make excuses. He simply apologized, took full responsibility for his actions, and thanked her for teaching him a lesson that, while painful, he desperately needed to learn. Maya received the letter and read it sitting at her new desk in the operations department. She thought about it for a long time. Then she tucked it into a drawer and went back to work. She didn't need his apology to move forward. She had already done that on her own, but she hoped for his sake that he had finally learned what she had always known: that every person has value, that kindness costs nothing, and that dignity isn't determined by job titles or bank accounts, but by how we treat the people who can do nothing for us in return. That was the lesson, and it was one worth learning no matter how hard the cost.